Other interesting business news, you have Buick dealerships opt out of General Motors EV program at a rate of 50%. Now, this comes to us thanks to a website by the name of Electrek.co, which A plus for marketing makes sense. You're going to talk about electric vehicles. Now, specifically, this is from Michelle Lewis, and they note that half of U.S. Buick dealerships will choose buyouts over selling EVs in 2023. Now, again, interesting. So perhaps, now again, we've looked at General Motors throughout the show several times. Mary Barra originally had a goal of Cadillac being full EV by 2030 and full EV, for Chevrolet, Buick, as well as GMC, them to be full EV by 2035. According to this article, perhaps they accelerated their adaptation rate or their transformation rate. This article says that Buick is moving to be all electric by 2030, and GM gave Buick dealers a choice in 2022: invest money. Geez Louise, I had to do a double take at the investment that GM wants for these dealerships to sell EVs. So if you're a Buick dealership and you want the privilege, well, let's be honest, a curse to sell General Motors EV Buicks, you would have to invest between $300,000 and $400,000. Now that is according to Automotive News, so that they can prepare to sell EVs. And the alternative is, well, you can just voluntarily give up your franchise, also known as you would no longer have the privilege or curse of selling Buick vehicles. So, I mean, obviously, you won't get any new vehicle allocations. You won't have the signage that represents the brand that 18 people still know and love, which, again, most of these dealerships have multiple brands that they work with. We've kind of moved past the day and age where there's kind of the singular dealerships where you'd represent one brand. Now there's pretty much more diversified. Now, they know that Buick dealerships opted into electric had previously been responsible for about 20% of the company's U.S. sales. Really? That's not too good. Some of your most best performing dealerships are now saying they would rather lose the ability to sell your product versus invest all that money into selling your new product. Now, they also know that Duncan Aldred, who's the vice president of Global Buick BMC, told Automotive News, quote, "I'm really pleased with where we are. The network, where we are now, is a good size. It's with dealers who are focused on the business, who've shown that they can recover the volume that the dealers who transitioning away were doing." Buick noted that around 89% of the U.S. population still lives within 25% of their dealerships. No, I can't fathom trying to remember that time I saw Buick, let alone saw Buick I actually want to buy. Perhaps one of the coolest things they did in my lifetime for Buick would be I believe it was the Regal GS. They actually had a Buick with a turbocharged inline four-cylinder engine with Brembo brakes, and, most impressively enough, it had a manual transmission, also known as three pedals, also known as the best way to drive a vehicle, bar none. That's probably one of the coolest things Buick's done in my lifetime. But besides then, you've gotten to the point where Buick it's gone down in popularity and the perceived value of the brand. Now, it looks like going to Electric's take, they know that GM spokesperson Sean Poppett told Detroit Free Press, quote, "The average dealer throughout tripled while reducing 40% of our dealer points. These are compelling numbers. We have a leaner, stronger, and more effective network," unquote. So that's why Buick doesn't appear to be fazed by the drop in dealerships. They likely anticipated it. The 100% electric by 2030 plan is great, and the auto brand strategy is lean and clean. It wants all of its dealerships to be fully bought into the transition into EVs. Yeah. That'll be interesting. Again, when you look at the demographics of who buys Buick and Cadillacs, on average, most of them are more elderly. And again, if you look at the adoption rate of EVs, I would be curious to wonder, well, are they buying EVs at the same rate as other demographics? You also have a shorter time period to sell them products. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. Now, let me see here. Interesting enough, they do have a fun little comment section, so dive in there really quick. One of the first comments comes from Elliot Gierno, and they say, quote, "Why do dealerships exist? Most people would say it's to sell vehicles, of course, but most of a dealership's money is made on the maintenance of the vehicle. They only make a couple $100 on the sale of the vehicle, unless it's marked up beyond MSRP. So why do dealerships want to avoid sell?" selling EVs because EVs represent an existential risk to their existence, unquote. Well, for the record, if you sell it at MSRP, they're making a couple $1,000s. It's not zero. And when they show you the dealer invoice, that's BS. They also get spiffs and incentives. So if they sell a certain amount of vehicles, they usually get a bonus from the parent company or the manufacturer of those vehicles. And there are several other ways that they make vehicles profitable. Also, financing is huge. Accessories is huge. So even if they were to sell to MSRP, they're still making a pretty penny. Granted, it'd be a vintage penny, which is made out of actual copper, as opposed to the rudimentary garbage that they use now to make pennies, which is 99.99% zinc and just simply copper plated. It also costs the U.S. government, or more accurately, costs us, the taxpayers, a little over 2 cents to mint a 1 cent penny, which is perhaps a good metaphor for the United States government in general. So, and again, when they talk about making money on the vehicle, excuse me, yes, also they say, why do dealerships exist? To sell vehicles, of course. Yeah, that is another point of contention with auto dealerships. They make a lot of their money on services, and with EVs, there's a misconception. They do require service and maintenance. They require different, and in some cases less. Now, the big 500-pound gorilla in the room, or elephant in the room, is the lithium-ion battery that could cost you between, 12 and 25 grand, depending on what kind of vehicle you get. Now, that being said, I'm not sure how profitable it is to actually resell the battery if you're a dealership compared to how much maintenance they're losing or how much revenue they're losing and profit they're losing by not being able to do more traditional things like you have the oil changes, probably one of the most, oil changes, timing belts, the oil filters. There are a lot of things that they lose. So I'll be interested to see how dealerships are affected. Doug Collins says, quote, "It's interesting that Buick needs 1,000 dealerships in the U.S. They have about 1% market share here. Most of the cars are made and sold in China." Let's see here. Let's see. Pete Za says, quote, "One possible outcome from something like this is that, excuse me, the fewer dealerships there are out there, the easier it will be in the long run to migrate to direct sales. GM just needs to keep increasing the effort to maintain a dealership to the point where it's not worth it to keep paying the franchise fees or whatever it requires to have a dealership. Eventually, if enough dealers go away, GM will have a valid reason to have laws changed to allow direct sales. One can dream," unquote. Well, probably not, because the existing dealerships are still going to make a bunch of the money, and really the laws will change once the manufacturers get lobbyists to have the states understand they will receive the same or greater amount of sales tax revenue. Most states, one of the number one incomes for those states is sales tax from new vehicle sales, and more disgustingly, used vehicle sales, which have already been taxed multiple times. So if they can just communicate to the states, hey, you'll still get that money, it's just going to be coming from someone else, and we'll have the law written in which wherever the customer is, it already in many states is wherever you live and register the vehicles where you pay that tax associated with the sale. But it could happen in our lifetime. But even if there's less dealerships, the revenue for the dealerships per dealership would just increase. So let me know in the comments if you think differently, but that could be a factor. Let's see here. Automotive says, quote, "In today's EV adoption, too many model dealerships offer twin offerings. GM killed Olds, Saturn, and Pontiac, and no reason for Buick with Cadillac and Chevrolet selling similar EV models in price. GM can't handle increasing current EV production and keeping quality in check. Tesla has it right." Well, there is very strategic reasons why they kept the remaining brands after the 2009 bankruptcy, which was, I believe, their third bankruptcy since Billy Durant founded the company all those years ago when he actually combined the two automotive companies, Buick and Oldsmobile. Fun business fact of the day. Now, in terms of Buick and Cadillac, Chevrolet, and GMC is the biggest elephant in the room. GMC, most of those vehicles are carbon copies of Chevrolets. It's just different badges, different paint in some cases. It's the same assembly line. Like, look at the Chevrolet Silverado, and you look at the GMC Sierra. They're both General Motors pickup trucks. Slightly different features, maybe. More often than not, it's just aesthetics. However, during the bankruptcy of 2009, their analysts did a bunch of research, and they found that the brand loyalty was so great with GMC, especially when you look at the construction worker industry, that there's just an overwhelming reason to keep it. Also, it doesn't cost them much to keep that brand around because, again, a lot of it is just different plastic decals that they paint on them, or I guess more accurately nowadays, just glue onto the vehicles. So it's not that much of a big burden to cost to keep those. Same reason they kept Cadillac, same reason they kept Chevrolet, same reason they kept Buick. They're the strongest brands that have the best sales. Now, don't get me wrong, I think Saturn was a brilliant idea when it first came out as a concept with General Motors. It was to compete with the Japanese market, and Japanese automotive companies have been exponentially increasing in the United States. And in those particular cases, Saturn actually, like many General Motors ideas, when it first came out, brilliant. It had a separate part of the company, separate leadership, separate assembly, separate. Everything was separate when Saturn first started. And they made some great vehicles to compete with the Japanese. Those dealerships are very unique, and also, unlike Chevrolet dealerships and Cadillac dealerships, there's no negotiating in a Saturn dealership. You went in there, you got I think they call it like the fair price of the fair car, the right car at the right price, or something like that, where very similar to Carfax, or you just go in there and you pay that price. There's no negotiating. So there are a lot of advantageous things around Saturn. Unfortunately, GM, and like they do with many products, destroyed it by, well, they decided to cut costs, consolidate things, where, again, then Saturn just became a rebadged vehicle of other GM products. They got rid of what was a more efficient assembly line process. They basically destroyed it. So there are many reasons why the remaining brands are still around. Especially in China, Buick is considered a huge luxury brand in China. Their sales in that country are really strong. Let's see here. Go do one or two more comments. Dan B says, quote, I started selling at Buick, Cadillac, GMC, and a Honda dealer way back in 1988 when Buick made real cars and not these boxes called SUVs, CUVs. I'm not sure how many Buick dealers were in operation back in 1988, but it would be safe to say that there were a lot more than the 2000, and of course, Buick sales were very good. Now today, they have exactly 4 models, how sad, and that are all SUV, CUV. Even more sad, although the Envista is kind of a mashup of a sedan hatch CUV, although not with a Buick dealer anymore. I'm still in the business, and I'm not hear much, if anything, about any Buick EVs for the US, so I get why nearly half of them said no thanks. I also understand that killing off the weaker dealers that don't produce can't allow other remaining dealers to sell more. On paper, that looks good. In reality, it's a terrible plan. You will now have the same buyer who live well over 50 miles from the nearest Buick dealership, and many well over 100 miles. No one is going to drive that far just to buy from a bland lineup of crossovers. Not when you could drive 5, 10, 15, or maybe 20 miles to find a Honda or Toyota or Nissan or Kia store. What makes me scratch my head the most, however, is that most of the Buick dealers are usually dual lines with GMC. They have the EV infrastructure for GMC Hummer EVs? I swear sometimes I feel like these companies are like the blind leading the blind. And yeah, it is sad how Buick used to have so many cool, unique vehicles, and throughout the years they've just consolidated to make less and less and less. Same thing with Chevrolet. They used to make some great vehicles with stick shifts, also known as 3 pedals and manual transmission, but in their infinite wisdom, sarcasm, obviously, General Motors decided to kill the Corvette, which is now automatic only, and they'll have an EV coming up. They killed the Chevrolet Camaro, which, again, was selling nearly double sales this year compared to last year, partially because it was leaked and then it was announced they were killing the product, which, again, that was a great vehicle, the good old V8 and a stick shift, and last generation was actually made in good old Michigan. Of course, GM decided to kill that product. And then the Chevy Cruze, which I was impartial to, is my first car. I love the little Chevy Cruze Eco with the stick shift. That was a great little vehicle, and they killed that as well. So it'll be interesting to see, as you see this transformation with these automotive companies trying to push more EVs and attempting to get a direct sales model, it'll be interesting to see how many of these franchises say, you know what, I'm fed up. I'm not going to pay for that big upfront investment for something that's going to be, for us, the dealership community, usually less profitable. And really, at the end of the day, you look at the adoption rates in the U.S., not many people want EVs. They're still selling, but the adoption rate is decreasing. The biggest category that's growing, interestingly enough, is hybrids, which, I mean, I'm not a fan because they don't have 3 pedals, also known as manual transmission. Best way to ever drive a vehicle. But I understand why many people do appreciate that. I might question their ability to do math for long-term ROI since the batteries will die and cost a lot of money to replace. But, excuse me, nevertheless, that is a huge shift in the industry. It'll be fascinating to see how it goes from there. Thank you, everyone, again, for taking the time to tune in today. Again, we're trying to get to 4,000 subscribers by the end of December. So if you could click that button, I would greatly appreciate it. Also, leaving a comment and a thumbs up is a great way to give me some additional feedback on how I can specifically improve the quality of the show, as I ever increasingly try to focus on enunciating more, slowing down my pace of speech, as that has been feedback that I know is something I need to work on. Also, and lastly, don't forget to take time to tell your family, tell your friends, tell your coworkers, heck, tell your enemies, tell anyone and everyone. Just stay safe and fight the good fight.